Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on now. So we talked about functions and we talked about parameters and variables. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a couple of extra things. So we're going to add in another function. So we've got this function. We've got this function called add two numbers. So we're going to add two numbers together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take out these comments. Oops. So again, we can take out the comments. So we've got two parameters coming in, a number 1 and a number 2, and we're saying this value x is equal to number 1 plus number 2. So if you imagine the value of 3 and 4 coming in, so when we call this function, for instance, down here, we're going to add two numbers together. So we're going to call this function add two numbers. We're going to pass it in the same way that we did this here, except now we're passing two numbers in. Instead of a string and a number, we're passing two numbers. So we add two numbers, 3 and 4. So 3 comes in that variable, the 4 comes in that variable, and then we're saying x is equal to the value of number 1 plus number 2. So what Python will do is it'll basically just add these two numbers together. So whatever's on this side of the equals, it'll do this first, and then it'll take that value, whatever that works out to, and it'll stick it into that x. So number 1 is 3, number 2 is 7. Number 1 is 3 and number 2 is 4. So it'll add those two together, so we get a value of 7 here, and it'll assign it to that value x. So x becomes equal to 7. And it'll print the value of x, which is, in this case, is 7 at the moment. And then this line here is saying, right, I'm going to evaluate what this side of the equals is. So it's going to say, what is x? Well, x, as we know at the moment, x was equal to 7 at this point. So here it's equal to 7. And then it's going to take 7 plus 1. So it's going to work out what that 7 plus 1 is. In other words, that's 8. And it's again going to assign it to that value of x. So that'll overwrite the value of what x was because it's the same variable name. So x now becomes equal to 8. So if I was to run this, you can see that when I run it, this is the bit of code here. So we're seeing these two values out. So x is equal to 7 and x equals to 8. What I'm going to do to just make it so we don't get confused about things is I'm just going to take out these two function calls. And I'm just going to call that add two numbers by itself so you can see clearly exactly what's going on. So the total is 7 and the total is 8. So total is 7 and then total is 8, and that's what gets printed out. And that's because what we're doing is we're taking that 7 value here, which we've worked out, and then we're adding 1 to it, and then it'll print out the value 8 here. So that's adding two numbers. So when we write functions, we generally try and make sure that we name the function exactly what it's doing, so we know, so it makes it easier to find out what bit of code is doing whatever it is that, whatever the function name is, we want to know what that function is doing. So in this case we're adding two numbers. In this case we're printing hi. I could change this to print hi or print washing up stats, for example, yeah, and that'll tell us how many times someone's washed up the dishes. But if I'm going to change that, then of course what I need to do also, I need to also change the name of what it's being called here. So I can go up, instead of doing that print hi, I'm going to basically change it to this name here. So I can just double click on that, copy it, Control C, and then I go down here and I can double click on that and replace it. There is a quick way to actually do this within IntelliJ. You can actually just rename function names, and it will just go through the code and just rename it all for you. But if I run this bit of code, now you can see that we're getting the Alice scenario function being called. So the print washing up stats function being called as we want it to be called. So when we call that add two numbers, I'm going to comment out the Alice scenario on washing up bits again. We're going to call this a second time, this add two numbers, and this time passing two values, 10 and 10. So we'd expect it to be called the first time, it's going 3 and 4, so we get 7 and 8, and then the second time it gets called and we're printing out 20 and 21. So